Hi, I'm Lori Lee, and I teach anthropology at Flagler College, and I'm just here to talk to you about some of the ethics considerations you want to think about as you are designing and maintaining your design teams and thinking about issues like consent and coercion and undue influence. First, I just wanted to tell you, since this is a social science-based project, we are going to adhere to the ethics for social science research, and there really are 5 of those. And that is, the first one, social science is fundamental to a democratic society and should be inclusive of different interests, values, funders, methods, and perspectives. The second one is all social science should respect the privacy, autonomy, diversity, values, and dignity of individuals, groups, and communities. Third, all social science should be conducted with integrity throughout, employing the most appropriate methods for the research purpose. 4, all social scientists should act with regard to their social responsibilities in conducting and disseminating their research. And 5, all social science should aim to maximize benefit and minimize harm. So those may seem pretty straightforward and self-evident, but it can get a little murky because not everyone agrees on what is common sense or ethical, because those are culturally influenced. And so people may have some differing ideas about what might be coercion. And so we're here to help you figure out those tricky issues. I should say, first of all, anytime you're in doubt, you should contact Caitlin Posey or Justin Forbes, and we will help you figure out those situations. That said, we've spent a lot of time thinking about these things in advance for you, so we will talk to you about these things as we think you need to be aware of them. One of the first things I wanted to emphasize just again that I said just a moment ago is that what might seem like common sense is culturally relevant. So you need to think about that. Culture is about where and when people are from, and since you're working with diverse populations, you don't want to assume that everyone thinks the same way you do. So when you put your design teams together, we really want to emphasize the different interests, values, methods, and perspectives of people in our society. So as you maintain your design teams, we're aware that people will rotate on and rotate off. Do your best to make sure that you maintain inclusivity when you replace people who need to rotate off. You also need to be aware that for your youth leader that they must be at least 13 years old. First, we'll start with some thoughts on coercion and undue influence. Coercion means that you threaten someone if they will not participate. So it does imply that there is a threat involved. That is how it differs from undue influence. Undue influence could be something more positive, that someone may be coerced into doing something because they perceive the benefit that they're going to get is something that they really need. So coercion, again, the basis of that definition agreed on by social scientists is that it involves some sort of threat. So in relationship to this project, that would be something like, if you don't participate in this project, then your church will not receive the funds that it's supposed to get. That threat may make someone feel as if they must participate, right? So it should be clear to participants that their participation is not contingent on that. The funds that were allocated to the church have already been given, and so their participation is not contingent on that. You should know, when thinking about what coercion means and undue influence, just remember that it is this idea that there's a threat behind what would happen if you don't participate. Undue influence is different in that people can be influenced. So if you have people who have different socioeconomic backgrounds and you're offering a $20 payment to participate in the research, then you may be providing undue influence for people who have differential access to resources. So if somebody is particularly impoverished, they may feel absolutely compelled to participate because they really need that money, whereas somebody who had higher socioeconomic status wouldn't feel the same pull because they didn't necessarily need that access. So for that reason, a lot of these issues that surround coercion and undue influence have to do with payments. who should get compensated, how should they get compensated, when should they get compensated, those questions. And it seems to be, based on the study that was done, that it's because many researchers feel that science is pure and that we shouldn't monetize it. So if people want to participate in science projects, they should volunteer. But volunteerism is not necessarily not subject to the same issues of coercion and undue influence. So we've bypassed all of that by taking out the issue of money. So there will be no monetary awards offered to anyone. Secondly, your participants will receive gifts when they come and participate, but those gifts are not contingent on participation. So anyone who's been a part of the project and came to the first meeting would have access to all of those things should they want it. They do not need to stay in the program as a participant to receive those gifts. This removes the problem of dealing with undue influence. Those questions of who gets compensated, when, and how. If someone wants to receive those gifts and they feel uncomfortable continuing and participating, we'll happily provide those. When you're thinking about recruiting your teams, we want you to think about the issues involved in recruitment that can be related to coercion and undue influence. When you think about how you recruit people, we'd like you to be mindful of the words that you use and the things that you promote. Think about how you frame things linguistically, what words you use to promote the project so that you're not using undue influence. For example, it's important to remember that you're dealing with people who are in a community who have a strong sense of belonging to that community. So undue influence doesn't just have to appeal to compensation, it can also appeal to things like altruism and the idea that you will sacrifice yourself for the betterment of your community. So you wouldn't want to say to someone, we couldn't do this without you, our community would really suffer if you don't participate, so that they feel like they are compelled to participate even though it's not in their best interest, because it's in the best interest of the community. As you're recruiting, you can certainly talk about the benefits of the program. It is the largest research program of its kind that's been done, and the results, we hope, will make a big difference in including marginalized voices in church communities. And that is the goal. So use that as a recruiting tool. Once you have people recruited, you can start to emphasize things like the trips that will be included. Prior to having your teams organized, you might want to talk about the fact that if people are concerned about participating because it might have some costs or risks for them, they should know that for the annual forum and for the retreat, that all of their needs will be covered in terms of meals and lodging if they are traveling from afar. So they won't feel compelled to ask you whether or not they will be expected to pay for something like that. And again, just think about it in terms of meeting practical needs instead of promoting it as a kind of compensation. And again, once you have recruited people and you want to generate excitement about the program, you can certainly think more about how you want to frame those trips and what kinds of experiences people will be having on those trips, but try not to use them as recruitment tools. So I just want to talk a minute about inclusivity and setting the tone. You need to be mindful again of the fact that when you're dealing with a diverse population, you want to think about how you make them comfortable from the very beginning. So when you're meeting with a new group of people, you want to make sure that you introduce yourself and have them introduce themselves, but make sure in that introduction, and you do it yourself first to model that you introduce who you are, say whatever pieces of information you want them to include in their introduction, and try and include something like their pronouns, because you can't always tell by looking at someone how they identify. So identity politics are very important. And if you misidentify somebody and identify them according to how you perceive them instead of according to their identity politics, then you can exclude them from the very beginning. So we found that it's very helpful to say, my name is Lori Lee, my background is in anthropology, my pronouns are she, her, and hers. Be aware that not everyone, though, is aware of that or equally comfortable with that, because what will happen if you have a diverse population in terms of age, some people may be confused about what you're talking about and they may feel threatened by that. They may not know why you're asking that. So you might want to preempt the entire conversation with a discussion of identity politics, and that we want to embrace inclusivity and diversity, and to that end we're trying to get everyone's self-definition on record before we get started with talking to each other. Another important thing we want you to be aware of is that you need to obtain consent and assent. We are attaching forms for this so that you know what these look like and can think about how you want to introduce them to the people you're talking to. But in order to include anyone in the study, we need their permission. And if they are a minority, so if they're under 18, we also need the consent of their parents. So anyone on your design team who is under 18, we need you to have those forms, those parental consent forms, completed and sent in for the next meeting. The consent and assent forms just let people know that why we're doing the research, what we're going to do with it, that we're taking photos and making videos, and they can decide if they want to be a part of that process by signing the consent form. You also need to be aware, if you're dealing with individuals who have cognitive impairment, either on your design team or as participants, those will also require an assent form. If they're minorities, they will need assent from their parents. And so we will make sure that we train you in how to deal with these issues, and be certain that you have those, and let people know that they're private. Those will be kept in a locked safe, and no one outside the principal researcher will have access to that safe. Privacy is critically important, and we want to maintain the privacy and anonymity of the individuals that we're working with. Another issue regarding privacy is the anonymity of participants. Lead innovators will be identified and will be public figures. The churches will be identified and be public figures, but any participants and youth will maintain their anonymity. In any publications or public presentations, we will use pseudonyms for those individuals. So everyone participating should be aware of that, and that is part of the consent form. Any interviews that are taken with participants may be recorded, but those recordings will not be published. Those will also be kept in a locked safe. Any surveys that people take will also be kept in a private location, only accessible by the principal investigator and co-investigators. So make sure that people know that although things are being filmed, that they will maintain their anonymity. Again, the most important thing we want you to remember is that the goal of social science research is to maximize benefit to the participants, to the audience, and to minimize harm to the participants. So keep that in mind as your measuring stick when you're trying to make your decisions about what to do. And if you have any doubts at all, or two people who don't agree on whether or not something is coercion or undue influence, then please contact us and we'll help you make that decision.